and you find in the realm of faith, like 1 + 1 seems to sometimes equal 12.
Hey, welcome to Ascend the Hill with Jeremy Austill. I'm Jonathan. This is Pastor Jeremy. How's it going?
It's going really well. Are we officially in fall?
I think the first day of fall wasn't it this past weekend? Wasn't it Sunday or the 20th? Is it the 20th?
Charity's off screen. Is it fall now? Yep.
Yeah, it is fall. I mean, if you have Starbucks, fall starting in August, but
well, and Christmas will start in October when they break out which they still do peppermint mocha all year long now, by the way.
Really?
Anyway, yes.
I guess I didn't realize that. Oh, man.
Yes. So it's fall.
It is fall.
The weather has shifted. Last week, Michelle and I went on a minister's retreat. It's the Assemblies of God. They do a retreat for ministers across the state in Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg. So we went to that and did a little hiking, hung out with a lot of ministry friends, spent time there was some services. It was good.
Yeah.
We had a good time, and then came back Thursday. We had the men's vision over the weekend. And then Saturday, what a day of college football. All sorts of games on. Tennessee beat.
It was wild.
University of Texas, San Antonio. And we played. I mean, we didn't hit the bottom of the barrel. University of Texas, San Antonio. Had a great Sunday, and so here we are.
Yeah. Now, for all the traveling folk that listen, when you go to Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg area, is there like you love coffee, so is there like one coffee shop that you love to go to when you're there?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I mean, we bring our own pot from home.
Oh, really?
And make our coffee like we do every day. And so it's not, we don't do much coffee purchasing. We bring it all with us.
That's fun.
But there's nothing quite like a cup of coffee on the back deck, and it was cool enough. It was in the 40s in the mornings. And
goodness.
Have a blanket and a rocking chair looking over the woods. It was pretty awesome.
I guess that makes sense because it is higher altitude than here.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a trail. It's kind of a scenic trail ride. You just get in a car, you get on one of those razors and ride through it in the mountains that we like to do. Not Cades Cove, because I've gone to Cades Cove like 3 times, and I will never go back because like it's bumper to bumper traffic every time I've been.
Oh man.
And that was not fun. But this other one we found isn't like that. It's a little motorway, and but it was crazy in those mountains with that river coming off the mountain. It was 15 degrees cooler in that canopy than when you come out of it.
Oh, yikes.
It was just wild. So we hiked and took some pictures, had a good time. So it was fun. But no coffee spot. My favorite pancake spot there is Sawyer's.
Oh, yeah?
In Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg, there's 8 million pancake shops, and they all close at like 1 o'clock. But Sawyer's is my favorite.
Yeah.
So I'll just throw out a few restaurants. Do you go to Pigeon Forge? Do you know much about it?
No, I don't. We don't go a lot. We've been, since I've been here, I've been twice.
Okay.
And since I've lived in Nashville, so that's 8 years.
Yeah. So you haven't gone a lot.
No, nope.
So really, we've gone to that minister's retreat for a decade now.
Yeah.
But we over the last few years have gone to Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg somewhat frequently as a family because we found things we like to do. They have a great steak place called the Peddler. And, for years, I didn't know this. The Peddler is the name of the person who brings this huge slab of beef to your table and says, "What do you want?" And, how many ounces.
Really?
And so
I need a Peddler.
Michelle and I shared a 14-ounce ribeye.
Hey.
And so we told him, and he cuts it off. Of course, this is the first time the Peddler has been active that we've been there since pre-COVID.
Oh, really?
COVID ended the Peddler. At least that guy's job. And so I guess he was peddling in the back where nobody could see. But anyway, so we like the Peddler.
Yeah.
I don't even know why I'm talking about this. You didn't even ask.
No, but you start bringing down the restaurants. I'm like, hey, it is coming up on holiday vacation season.
I'm 3/4 of the way into this coffee, and I'm getting lit.
Well, coming off of vacation season soon. Like it's fall, Christmas, Thanksgiving, even fall break. There's a lot of fun things coming up.
Yep.
And even this past weekend, you mentioned it. It was a good Sunday. It was a good Sunday last Sunday. I know we didn't have a podcast last week, so we've been in the series Encounters for that. We were just second week this past Sunday.
Yes.
And really just walking through a brief recap, walking through people's encounters with Jesus in the Gospels.
Yes. So the first week we talked about what is famously known as the woman with the issue of blood.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times in her narrative, it's lost that Jesus also healed Jairus' daughter. You know, so that's interesting.
Who was dead.
Yeah,
Like,
she died.
Yeah, it wasn't just like
when Jairus came to Jesus, she was sick.
Yeah,
and then he pauses when the woman with the issue of blood receives her healing, and then in the middle of all of that pause and Jesus getting to Jairus' house, she dies, and Jesus goes and raises her from the dead. And then this past Sunday, we talked about the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well. I'll tell you right out of the gate, when this series was in my heart because I love talking about Jesus. But in beginning this series, I've got a long list on my dry erase board in my office of all the different encounters. But and maybe this is just a me thing. All of them are so familiar to me.
Yeah.
That sermon prep for these first two has required more of me. It's been more of a grind because they are so familiar. And I've said from the pulpit several times, the hardest passages to preach are the most familiar ones because you do have that element of I've heard this before, and then maybe I'm projecting a little too much on everyone, of their familiarity versus mine. So this Sunday we talked about the Samaritan woman, and I took a pretty good chunk of time just to explain that why Samaritans and Jews were at odds with one another.
Yeah.
Now that's something I've lived with and understood for a long time, and it's super familiar to me, but I don't want to assume that everybody in the congregation, it's as familiar to them. And so some of my familiarity issues are like mental blocks that I've got to get over.
Yeah.
Like this isn't overly familiar to everybody. But those texts are sometimes tricky to preach because you do have that like, man, this has been said a lot of times. How can I say it in a way that's different or lift something off the page that's not been said as much? And some of that's my personality type. My personality, like I can't stand to be basic,
Right.
like I want to, when you're done with a conversation with me, when you're done with a message with me, like one of the most painful thoughts for me is that you walked away and felt like I just regurgitated stuff that's been said a million times. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm built that way. I think it's probably an asset. It's an asset for other people. It is a bone of contention for me because I fight myself so hard in those areas. And maybe I don't even know if this is relevant to anybody, but just a little peek behind the curtain, for anybody that's curious about preaching and all of that. I feel like a lot of times I unnecessarily wrestle with myself, when it's, for everybody else, it's like, it's okay, you know? So anyway.
Well, and I feel like sometimes the familiarity of a passage or something makes you feel like if you don't force yourself to dig into it, you'll feel like you're coasting through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So good there.
Yeah.
And yes, that.
Yeah.
And I never want to waste a Sunday,
Right.
or a Wednesday. If I'm going to be in front of the people and I'm going to be standing at that sacred desk and I'm going to be declaring the word of the Lord, you don't want it wasted.
Right.
And that's another layer for me that's, I had a conversation with one of our staff pastors this week. It's hard for me, the thought of I'm going to get up and I'm going to preach a message, and it's going to be informational and educational with not like a in the moment possibility for it to be transformational. Like, a lot of ministers and this isn't a critique, it's just, we are very comfortable, maybe because they operate more in the teaching gift, with just like, I'm going to get up here, I'm going to break this down, and you're going to walk away and have a better understanding of this, and then we're going to pray and move on.
Yeah.
Like for me, I want as much as possible, every week that I can to be able to hang my hat on something where people can receive ministry.
Right.
Where they can say, I'm going to receive prayer for this, or I'm going to reach out in faith to the Lord for this. And so we were talking about the Samaritan woman, that text. There is that educational, theological element that we didn't even get into, of her asking, where should we worship? Should we worship? Our people, the Samaritans, say you worship on Mount Gerizim. You Jewish people say it's in Jerusalem. And Jesus said, there's a time that's coming, it's actually here, where none of that matters.
Yeah.
What matters is it in spirit and in truth? You could teach on that and spend a good bit of time on it, and then be like, all right, we're good.
Yeah.
But it's like, I need to find that spot because every single Sunday, every single Wednesday, there are people that are going through it.
Yeah.
They're in need. They need ministry. They need something to exert their faith toward. Sometimes they just need to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel the affection of somebody else in the body of Christ, reaching out in prayer.
Yeah.
I think that's such a crucial part. Like, what we do in church isn't just educational. It's not just informational. I went to Bible college, and it was educational.
Yep.
But like, church has to have that transformational element to it, and it has to have that body element to it, like I'm engaging with the people of God. So anyway, all that to say, I don't know, I guess I'm in some way saying this past Sunday's message, I knew I was going to preach that for weeks.
Yeah.
But man, in my mind, I'm just like, what is the word of the Lord in the middle of all of that?
Yeah. And, the past 2 weeks, there's been different levels of faith relevant to those stories. Like you mentioned, the woman with the issue of blood interrupts his walk to Jairus' house. And it is kind of crazy because you hear a lot about the woman with the issue of blood, but this other huge miracle happened just after, when he brings someone back from the dead.
Yes.
And then the flip of it, it seems like the woman comes to faith after her encounter with Jesus.
Yes.
And so it's like, when we're going through these stories and these encounters, when it comes to like the one with the issue of blood or Jairus' daughter raising from the dead, it's almost like they had, like it seems like a lesson in faith despite your circumstances. Like almost you see your circumstance and say, I almost like in like a rebellious way of saying like, no, I reject that because I really do believe that the Lord can do something, right?
Yes. I love the story of Jairus and the woman with the issue of blood. I love that they are together because there are different expressions of faith in that narrative, which I think teaches us that it's not a one size fits all. This is exactly precisely how you have to exert your faith for God to move on it. Like Jairus, he approaches Jesus, he petitions Jesus. He's not there. He's petitioning on behalf of his daughter, right? He is intense. He is aggressive. He's pleading, right? So he's got that faith. And then you have this other woman who's quiet, who's broken, who's humble, and she doesn't really say anything other than she says to herself, if I can touch the hem of his garment. Like she was like speaking to herself, and then she just reached out and touched. And I shared it in the message. I mean, my favorite part of that experience is, and it's hard to wrap your mind around, Jesus seemingly was caught off guard.
Yeah.
Like there was something in her that pulled something in him out without him planning on it. And that's just, I mean, that theologically I mean, that'll just send you down a spiral of how do I reconcile all of that?
Yeah.
But that goes back to, like, a lot of times in our Americana, in our Western civilization, in our, Greek influenced society, if you will, we place value on, analytical. Like, I want a list of rules.
Yeah.
I want 5 steps. Like, I want to be able to plug 1 + 1 in and guarantee 2.
Yeah.
And you find in the realm of faith, like, 1 + 1 seems to sometimes equal 12.
Yeah.
The rules are, and I think part of the reason you see in a text like that they went about it differently, and what something came out of Jesus, with this woman, and then on the other hand, Jesus, intentionally went to Jairus' daughter. I think part of the reason the Gospels are filled with that, one time Jesus takes mud and rubs on somebody's eyes, I think part of the reason for that is because if we had a locked in guaranteed pattern, like if I do this every time, I'm gonna get exactly the result, then in many ways we become the master.
Oh, yeah.
To God. Like, we become controlling of God. Like, I can control him.
Yeah.
Because if I do this, this, and this exactly this way, and so we become the master. We become the one in charge.
Yeah.
I think I've preached on Jacob wrestling with God, and in that text in Genesis 32, I believe it's Genesis 32, Jacob he's wrestling with God, and he asks God what's his name, and God wouldn't tell him his name. Because in that Old Testament paradigm, surrounded by paganism, it was the belief of a lot of people in the land, if they could know the name of their God, they could have some control over what their God did. They could control their God. So God did not reveal his name to Jacob because he was saying, like, you're not the one in control here, right? And so I come back to, as much as I would love to be able to stand in that pulpit and say, if you will do these 4 things, you are guaranteed this result.
Yeah.
In that, we diminish God and we flip the relational dynamic. Instead of, no, you are God, and ultimately you do all things well, even if I can't perceive them in the natural as well.
Yeah.
And I trust you no matter what the circumstance is. But at the same time, knowing 2 people expressed faith and it moved the heart of Jesus. And so we too, when we express faith, position ourselves to potentially move the heart of Jesus on our behalf. So,
Yeah.
man, all that's hard. Like, I love preaching about faith, but it's that tension of, I've heard a lot of people preach in the realm of faith, and it's like there's just this dogmatic approach to it that kind of eliminates God from the equation, and makes it all about us. And I struggle with that. But on the flip side, there's this other approach that we really have no influence. And I can't see that in the Bible. Like, you read cover to cover and you just see how much people influence the outcomes of their life as they partnered with God, or sometimes as they defy God, whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's all good because you mentioned like the difference between the two, and we haven't talked about the show in a while, but The Chosen, like they portrayed these 2 scenarios.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting way they did the woman with the issue of blood, because of the way Jesus reacts. It's a great visual of, like, he might have reacted that way. There's facial expression and stuff.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's like so taken aback that something just happened that he wasn't expecting it,
Yeah.
And it's so weird to see that. And then him going just alone with his 3 disciples to heal the girl.
Yeah.
And then this week you talked about he went out of his, he intentionally went to that well.
Yeah.
Almost as if he knew he was.
He knew.
Yeah, he knew what was going to
so
happen.
So here's sovereignty now.
Yeah.
I don't feel like his meeting with that Samaritan woman was happenstance.
Right.
Whether it was he specifically had her on his mind and he knew she was, or he just knew that, like, I am going through Samaria to intentionally break some stuff. Mm-hmm. Because going through Samaria, and it does on The Chosen, you mentioned that on The Chosen, you get that poetic license of knowing the historical context that there was enmity between the Jewish people and the Samaritans. And so the disciples were kind of aggravated and ticked off. Like, why are we going here? Why are you sending us in this city? These people are horrendous. Mm-hmm. What are we doing? I feel like Jesus very intentionally went to Samaria with the intention of all of these prejudices I'm breaking. Like, I've come to destroy them. Yeah. And I'm going to destroy them in part through the process of having a life-changing encounter with somebody I'm not supposed to have a life-changing encounter with. And I just think it's powerful, it's beautiful. And we could have, in that vein, like, I could preach the woman on the, at the well on an Easter Sunday. Yeah. And talk about how it doesn't matter what you've done, who you are. You're an enemy of God, but he comes and sits down with you. It's a beautiful, beautiful not story, because stories imply that it didn't happen. It's a beautiful occurrence.
Yeah, and it is interesting too that he intentionally did something not only to reach someone, but also to teach his disciples a lesson of who they should love. Yes. And I feel like that is pretty relevant to today. Yes. Of, like, what we face in society of, like, well, you're in this camp, you're in this camp. Even within the Christian community, I feel like we can struggle with that,
Yeah, and I alluded to that in one of the services. I feel like I alluded to, the way the Jewish people felt about the Samaritan people might be how we would feel about someone proclaiming Christ, but they morally, seem to side with the things of this world. Yeah. So, it's our podcast, know, a Christian that is affirming of homosexuality, a Christian that is pro-abortion, a Christian that is, pro-pornography or is whatever, these things, somebody that doesn't profess Christ, when they are affirming of all those things, it's like, they don't know Jesus. Yeah. But somebody that knows Jesus, supposedly stepping into an arena that seems to be just biblically incongruent with Jesus, makes you feel some kind of way. Yeah. Like, I feel differently about that. Mm-hmm. And so I can imagine the Jewish people looking at the Samaritans, but you have, like, there's an ethnic element to it, and geographical element to it, and you have hundreds of years of history attached to it. But basically, y'all are over here quoting the first 5 books of the Bible, but you're also over here embracing all this paganism. What are you doing? Like, this, like, I could see how that would make them angry. But Jesus came to say, look, like, I'm going to sit down with them, because I'm big enough, I'm strong enough, there's enough in me to break all of the things off of them that are in error. Yeah. And to bring them into the fold and then simultaneously he was breaking the error in the people that were devoted to him. And that, I mentioned that maybe in both services, how it's possible to walk with Jesus but still have prejudices. Yeah. And I think probably, maybe prejudice isn't the word for some of us, but all of us are walking with Jesus with thought processes, ways, attitudes that are not yet lined up with him. But Jesus is so merciful. He's so gracious. He's so patient. there's no doubt he knew what his guys were thinking, but he didn't just tear them to pieces. He just like, you're going to see, like, they're going to get a revelation in this moment of something different in me that they aren't lined up with yet, you know?
Yeah. And also you mentioned a good point. Like, it seems like instead of just berating his disciples of like, you shouldn't think this way, he's like, it doesn't even seem like he does that. He just does the thing.
Yeah.
And then processes the experience with them.
Yeah.
Like, they're like, even in the text, it was like, they didn't even ask him about it.
No, they didn't ask.
They were too afraid.
They were, they didn't have the nerve.
Yeah.
I think it's what the New Living Translation says. They didn't have the nerve. And then, on the heels of that, they start talking about, are you hungry? And Jesus is like, no, I'm good. I've already ate. Mm-hmm. And they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean? And he said, well, doing the will of the Father. I mean, he's just constantly teaching them stuff, and I like all the tensions in this account.
Yeah.
And that's what you find so much with Jesus, which as we get into this series, we'll probably kind of unveil this more and more. I think we all have a tendency, and you especially, see it as you pay attention through society, of crafting a Jesus that fits our preferences.
Yeah.
And the reality is, Jesus put everybody on blast, so to speak. Like, not in a harsh way, not in a lot of times, not in a direct way, but because of who he was, how he handled people, what he did, things he said, not necessarily said to you, but he was saying. I was reading with the kids last night. We're reading through the book of Hebrews, and it talks about the word of the Lord is sharper than a double-edged sword that divides between soul and spirit. That it exposes us, it reveals us, right?
Yeah.
And when you read Hebrews, you know that really the main idea of Hebrews is Jesus is preeminent.
Yeah.
And so when it says the word of the Lord, yes, it is talking about the Bible, but more so it is talking about Jesus divides between soul and spirit. Jesus exposes us. Like, Jesus causes us to be naked and nothing is hidden. Like, he is that great accountability in the earth. And so I love that throughout the scriptures, that ultimately everybody gets popped.
Yeah.
All of us get popped because he is perfect.
Yeah.
And we're not. And even in this text, you see it. And I don't know why I just thought about it, but I get cracked up at the woman. And I might have said it better in the second service. I'm not sure which service you played.
Second was on the podcast.
Okay, yeah. I felt like it came out a little better in the second service this week. But I just was fascinated by, like, he's trying to have this spiritual conversation with her, and she's talking about ropes and buckets, and it just takes her a while to get it, because a lot of times we don't get it. He's trying to do this deeper work in us, and we're focused on all the circumstance or the circumstances or the periphery. So that doesn't really have a lot to do with anything other than it came to my mind, and I just thought it was another neat little moment in the text.
Yeah, and I guess as we kind of wrap up, it is interesting that in that story specifically, I think it kind of captures, a lot of stories do this, but it kind of captured this week why the Bible is so good, in the sense of, it's not just religious text, it's trying to present itself as something.
Yeah.
It really exposes the human experience. Like,
yes.
Like, throughout the whole Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, like, when you read the stories of people, it's like, they're not hyped up on this pedestal. It's like, no, people would do that. No, David fell. David did some, David did some bad things. Saul did some bad things. Even his disciples, you see the human element of like, it really exposes, they're human, and this is what human nature really is,
Yeah. Well, all the way down to Jesus' humanity of he was tired.
Yeah.
He sat wearily. He needed a drink. So even Jesus in this text, we are getting his his humanness, if you will. The Bible really is the narrative of God.
Yeah.
It is God's story. It is us getting to know God. I think a lot of times you kind of said it. We come to it as a religious text, or we come to it as a theological work, or we come to it as a place for doctrine and all of that. But all theology is, all doctrine ultimately is us trying to wrap our minds around the God that we see in the text. And so Jesus, of course, and I've alluded to this in Hebrews. Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God. He reveals God's glory.
Yeah.
He reveals who God is, and who was God this week. As we read the Samaritan woman, he's the God who sits down with people that everybody else says he's not supposed to. He is the God who wants to satisfy and give us meaning and life. And he's the God that knows about the 6 men.
Yeah.
He's the God that knows about the 6 men, but he's still willing to talk.
Yeah.
And he wants to pull us out of the ruts and the patterns that we've been in, which really are human longing. Like there's this compassion connected to it, not you've blown it. And as we go through, you'll see and it's the thing I've said here and there. I was having a conversation with Neelan about this a few weeks ago, the tension that I feel preaching. On one hand, in preaching, hey, this is what the Word of God says. When we obey the Word of God, there are benefits. When we disobey the Word of God, there are repercussions.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of people, the difficulty in their life, not everybody and not every difficulty, but a lot of the difficulties people experience, myself, all of us, are of our own decision making, right?
Yeah.
So there's that element. But then there's the other element of, but what led to you making those decisions? What happened in your life? What was your upbringing life? Who wronged you? Decisions, bad decisions aren't just in the vacuum of a bad decision. There's a whole lot of life that led to that decision. And so I feel with the Lord that tension of we have to be accountable for the decisions we make, but there is just this mercy dripping heart that knows all the mess that led to that decision, And it's like, I want to just show you mercy and love and compassion, but I want to pull you out of the pattern.
Yeah.
And, it's just he's good.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think it's even as we end, Jesus's declaration when he reads from the scroll in Isaiah saying, I come to proclaim these things, the year of the Lord's favor, and it's happening now.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, Jesus was that expression of the favor of the Lord is that he has come to forgive sins.
Yeah.
And he has done that through Jesus. And it seems to be like, you've been waiting for the moment where you're free and it's here.
Here
and it's
we
kind
are.
of like the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've said it numerous times. I so deeply believe in the love, mercy, compassion of Jesus. I mean, so deeply, because it's what's really set me free.
Yeah.
All of my law keeping, all of my, efforts to be better and do better just felt like I'm going around the mountain over and over and over again. But the revelation of his goodness, his mercy, and love is what pulled me out of ruts. Because suddenly I'm loved, and that knowledge that I'm loved is a greater deterrent to those patterns than these patterns are causing me problems. I got to break from them.
Right.
I don't. Anyway.
Yeah.
So. We could talk all day about it. So I would ask you a question. I know we need to wrap up, but all right. So, and I think it would be interesting to hear. Maybe we ask this question a little more. Like, what are a couple of things in the message that stood out to you?
This past week?
Yeah. Or any of them.
Well,
Any of the last couple.
Well, the one that specifically stuck out to me last week was, you were talking about Jesus, the wedding in Cana. His mother comes up and says, "Hey, they need to do this," and he says, depending on what your portrayal, whether you see it in The Chosen, you read the text, or whatever, it's played out a couple different ways. But he basically says, "Woman, my time's not yet come."
Yeah.
Whether he was joking, I think it's funny if he's like joking with her and giving her a hard time. He's like, "What? My time's not come, woman. What are you talking about?" But she doesn't even respond to that in the text. She just goes, "Do whatever he tells you." That's the next line, and it's like she didn't even. She's like, "Yeah, whatever. I heard what you just said. I don't care. I'm your mom. Hey, do whatever he tells you." And you were like, Jesus said that it wasn't his time yet to be revealed, but she, because of the relationship she had with him and her request, he was like, "Okay, we'll make it happen."
Yeah.
And so he does it. So it was almost like just the boldness and faith of knowing, no, you're Jesus, and I know it's not time, but we need this.
Yeah.
It seemed kind of small because it's a wedding, It's like, well, okay, you're out of wine,
Right.
What's that? But then he's like, okay, and he does it, and I don't know why that stuck out to me, but it was almost like it felt like in today's present time there can be things that stick out to people, or people are praying for, and maybe Jesus is saying, and you said it kind of this way too, but maybe there's been things of like, wait, it's not time yet, but then because of the persistence and the faith and your love for his heart, he's like, okay, you know what? Yeah, it's time to turn some water into wine. And I was just like, cool. I think that was important for, me to hear, but it was like, okay, it may not be time yet, but because of persistence, because of faith and sticking around, just sticking with Jesus despite stuff, he's like, you know what? We'll do it. And it's not because he's like, you begged me long enough, fine. It's almost like, no, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's turn water into wine, because it's a joyous thing. Even in the Chosen version of it, it's like he does it, and then he celebrates the wedding with them.
Yeah.
They're dancing and doing all their traditions, and because of what he did, he added to that special moment, and it was just a small moment, but him doing that, showed he cared, and it was like, okay, this is a special moment. I love you,
And that's of course the first miracle.
Yeah. And
it has so many theological implications, but we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
But I love that that's what you picked up, because that was like a little blurb just to validate what I was saying about the woman with the issue of blood, that we have influence with the Lord.
Yeah.
Like that he is sovereign, but there are times when we can influence his heart, like the woman with the issue of blood, like Mary at the wedding of Canaan, like Abraham when it was Sodom and Gomorrah. So anyway, cool, man. I love you, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's great, and I love you. And it's been a great 2 weeks, and then we got another week coming up. I think Pastor Chase is preaching, because you'll be on vacation, right? And so it'll be a good weekend, and so be looking for the service this weekend, and we'll catch you on the next podcast. Have a good one.